All right. Welcome to the Unfazed, Unedited podcast, where we provide commentary on complicated topics in an uncomplicated format. I'm Dr. Shaunna Payne Gold, and I go by she, her, hers pronouns. And I'm here with Dr. Lisa in mid-June. We're just chugging along here, Dr. Lisa. How are you doing?
I am doing a-okay and have turned on my air conditioning for the first time.
What? Get out of here.
I have been resisting and resisting and resisting. And
That's so
it's
good.
finally hit. And I was like, okay, I got to put it on for a little bit.
Oh, that's so good. Look, let me tell you, I'm with you on the resistance, but I don't have to resist too much because my entire home is very shaded with trees. And so
Mm,
that really works out when it's really warm. My house is just naturally cool, but in winter, it's like, yeah, just got to break down and do it. But yeah, this is it's not traditional as we all know, so we have to kind of judge by our own temperature tolerance here. So
hmm
but my electric blanket does work some miracles around here without turning anything on or off. So I'll just say that.
Excellent.
But anyhow, let's jump right in, Lisa, because we have several big topics to talk about, but our first one
hmm
is the word of the week. So this month is June, which is Pride Month here in the United States, although we know that Pride Month can land differently at different points of the calendar all around the world. And even in your region, you might want to pay attention and think about other months in your region or state where Pride is going on outside of June. But June seems to be a relatively official month in the United States. And so we thought it would be appropriate to make sure that we brought up a few words in relation to those communities. And the first word that we wanted to bring up was closeted. Closeted. And this word describes a person who is not open about their sexual orientation. And what I think is really fascinating, Lisa, is that when I started doing my research in this particular area for my dissertation, as someone who's not part of the communities from the outside looking in, uh, outness is a process, a lifelong process. And so being closeted is also a lifelong process. And so
Yeah.
what I appreciated about this definition was to try to avoid using the word closeted. And this is partially because there's some history around being closeted being negative when actually it may not be, depending on that individual's point of view. So
hmm
rather,
hmm
I'm going to start working on this, Lisa, this is new to me, but I'm going to start working on not thinking, saying, or communicating that someone is closeted, but rather that an individual may or may not be out or out yet. As part of the LGBTQ communities. And so we've realized that there are people that never come out, some
hmm
people that never see a need to come out. They may
hmm
be out to certain people in their life. I remember when I first started doing my research, most people came out to very close friends or their mother in that particular time frame of their life. But we also know that people are choosing not to be out because of certain fears like rejection, harassment, actual
hmm
violence or threat to their lives, losing their job. Lots of research, current research
Yeah.
around
Yeah.
perspectives in the workplace. And so, given that, Lisa, I'm going to try to reframe my language from this word of closeted to not out.
hmm
And I think that would be more accurate. And I think, too, that takes some of the privilege that you and I have off of the language that we choose so that it's not constantly our choice of how to define someone, but their choice of how to define themselves. So I'm going to grapple with this more, Lisa. But what do you think about that new reframe of closeted there?
Yeah, I love it. And you also had sent me a piece written by someone who talked about the closet door is not for us to open, I think was how they framed it or
Mm-hmm.
something. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that,
Yeah.
as a heterosexual or straight person, that's an important reminder that not only should you not be outing people, right? And yanking people
Hello.
out of the closet, that
Mm-hmm.
for some, as you articulated, that maintaining privacy around their sexual identity is an important part of who they are. And that's not for anyone inside or outside of the LGBTQIA community to shame
Mm-hmm.
them, shame a person about, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
I
that's right.
really like that, thinking about, well, the closet door is not for us to open. And then also the negative connotations that have come with people who are making those choices,
Mm-hmm.
and how we can reframe that, right? And think
Yeah.
about it in more contextual ways, more individual ways. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love it, and I think that you never know the weight that someone carries based on their lived experience as to what they
Mm-hmm.
have to gain, what they have to risk, their safety on lots of different levels. And so I just appreciate rethinking a word that's been a pillar of LGBT research and conversation and lived experience for so
Yeah.
long, and kind of
Yeah.
shaking that foundation up a little bit. So I'm really grateful that
Mm-hmm.
we discovered that definition, that new definition, right? All right, so let's get into phase one. All right, Lisa. So phase one, y'all, if y'all got all the bonus footage of everything that Dr. Lisa and I text about, have conversation about, that we
Mm-hmm.
just have not heard hit record on, you would see how much we grapple with the production of these topics, right?
Yeah.
So this particular phase is built upon an article that Lisa sent me, that broached the conversation of a term or concept called hypernormalization. Now, initially, we were thinking, oh, hypernormalization could be the word of the week, until, of
Yeah.
course, here I am, y'all. I'm the disruptor. I'm the one that has a problem with things. I'm the one that wants to rethink things from a different direction. And as I was reading that great article that you sent me, Lisa, I'm thinking to myself, eh, I'm not sure if I agree with that based on everyone's lived experience. So let me kind of define what hypernormalization is for folks. It's from a Guardian article, and then we can grapple with it. But hypernormalization is this broad feeling of surrealism as this framework of US society appears to be collapsing all around us, all while we're just going on about our business, just doing what we do on a day-to-day basis. And
Mm-hmm.
as I read that definition of hypernormalization initially, the first thing I thought of was a piece of art that was AI generated immediately following the US election, where it was kind of the shadows or the outline of Black women sitting on top of a building from afar, looking at the city just burn to the ground while we're sipping tea, drinking our coffee. We have our shirts on that says the 92%. Like, we're just truly unbothered
Mm-hmm.
by what's going on as a result of the election in this particular AI footage. And then I saw subsequently similar art after, for example, the Nottoway plantation burned down to the ground. We saw similar things as well, where
Yeah.
there were visuals of people of color out in the front yard having a cookout, having a good time and line dancing because, hey, we're moving on with life. Even as the backdrop of our country is on fire, burning, pretty much collapsing. And so, what I thought was interesting about this concept, Lisa, was that I had to kind of query this for myself, because the assumption is something is not normal. We know that it can be normal. And there's some groups that feel as if they are acquainted with that normal, and we just need to find our way back to that normal.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, when I read the article, when you initially sent it, I'm thinking to myself, not sure I can go there with you as a Black person in this country. Not sure if I can go there with you as a woman in this country. Not sure I can go there with you with as any person of color in this country. Because as the quote says in the article, there are people that are seeing governing systems and institutions that are broken, and there's no effective leadership in place. And so they're not quite sure how to disrupt this, how to fix it, how
Mm-hmm.
to, and in fact, it it's almost disassociation, Lisa. It's like, how do you
Yeah.
carry on
Yeah.
while you know something's wrong? We're not denying something is wrong, but you also feel disempowered to fix it. You know something's wrong, but you don't know how to fix it. And so, Dr. Lisa, I'm appreciative that you brought this article to my attention. How do we kind of process this? Because you and I are members of identity groups that may have never experienced the normal that the hypernormalization is trying to point back to, I think. Can you hear how uncertain I am in this conversation right now?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know.
So it's a Soviet era concept, right? And there have been a lot of comparisons uh,
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
the Soviet Union and indeed current day Russia, uh, as it relates to leadership in this country and the ways in which rights are being limited and media access is being subverted, and corruption is growing. So I think the Soviet era piece, if it's coming out of that culture, right, it's not coming out of a culture where I actually don't know a lot of Soviet history, so I may be wrong in saying this, but I feel like the Soviet Union does not have a history of enslaving Africans, right? In the same way that the United States does. I mean, there are other things there. Obviously, they have a whole long history of royalty and violence and oppression. So I think that disconnect that you're feeling might be because of the origin of the concept. It's being overlaid onto US society, but it doesn't fit very well. And then I think about, like, I was looking up hyper versus hypo, right? And hyper is like over the top or excessive, whereas hypo is under, or there's a deficit. So it's like people are kind of going out of their way to normalize and just, like head in the sand a little bit, like going about their business. I'm scrolling through Facebook, and at the same, or not Facebook, because I came off of Facebook. I'm scrolling through Instagram, and I see, images of undocumented people being ripped away from their families, shackled, and smuggled out of the country in violation of a court order and put in a gulag in South America or Central America. And then and then the next post is like someone making a chocolate cake, or like decorating their dog with a funny little hat or something. And so there's this oscillation between these two, like, really extremes. And so I think that's why this idea is being applied, and that the only way to kind of manage that extreme disconnect between these two poles of reality is to, like, over normalize things. But I think it's dangerous to do that. I think it can name feelings for some people, but I think it's dangerous to do that because I think, to your point, it assumes a universality of experience that is perhaps not there to begin with. Um,
That's right. That's right.
and so I
Hmm.
part of why we moved this to a phase was because our kind of initial discussion around this was just really thought provoking in the ways in which a lot of the concepts that are kind of out and about right now to help people who are struggling with the I'm not even kind of sure what to call it, the destruction, the collapsing, the where are the limits, kind of raising your hands in the air piece, is that for some people, specifically Black Americans, there's never really been that sense of right or normalcy. And I think, Shaunna, this was most highlighted when I just finished reading the book James, which, if you haven't read it, people, you need to get on and read it. Anyway, it's just so good. I'm not gonna, this is not what this
Hmm.
is about, but it just really
Hmm.
it just continued to bring home to me, both as a white person, but as a white person who didn't grow up in this country, so didn't kind of grow up with that history or that connection, that emotional connection to the brutality and violence of slavery and white people's role in that. And so that connected me to a greater degree with what you're saying, in the
Yeah.
sense of I am grieving as a white person this
Mm-hmm.
this system of rightness or justness, or that's just
Yeah.
not what happens here, right? And
Right.
you're
Right.
saying, yes, it is what happens here, and it's been
Oh yeah.
happening here since
Oh yeah.
1619, right?
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. And that's where the that's where the I had to kind of disrupt the foundational assumption that there is a inherent rightness in the US that we need to get back to, because I'm sure that there is a group or and multiple groups of people that have never experienced that rightness in its fullness,
Yes.
right? So
Yes.
when it reminds me of there's so many different timelines that depict the history of race and racism in the United States. And so usually you have, 4 or 5 different sections to that timeline. You have the first one where it's just general race being introduced to the colonies, like what you said before, 1619. If you have not looked at the 1619 project, we encourage you to read the book and learn all about its curriculum. But of course, that's when folks like my ancestors were brought over by the Atlantic slave trade and other venues and other avenues here, if they made it here, by kidnapping to this country. So we started off as soon as the first
Yep. Yep.
enslaved African person put their big toe on land here, we
Mm-hmm.
started off wrong. Okay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then you have the expansion, obviously, you have the expansion of the United States, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, all the way up to the civil rights movements, 1964-ish moving forward. And yes, there will be people who are white, people of color, etc., who will make the valid argument that things have improved for certain people in certain groups. And at the same time, again, this normalization that
Mm-hmm.
we think that everyone has experienced the freedoms that the founders, in my personal opinion, did not intend for everyone, but for
Right. Right.
some, right? We forgot that part, has never been experienced. And so, but that doesn't mean we're taking away from the hope of people of color that we will eventually. So to me, I think it's like, are we returning to what is it? Lisa, when your iPhone does something ridiculous or your smartphone does something ridiculous and then you try to go back to factory settings?
Uh-huh.
Factory settings have been effed up for people of color in this country from
Yeah.
day zero. Okay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so for white folks and whomever may have written this article and they assume that they can go back to factory settings for this country because they were good for them, that's one lens. But the lens for others is not going to be the same. I would even say, of course, we haven't talked about this ad nauseum on this podcast, but for our immigrant siblings who came here looking for the factory settings for their experience as well, they chose to come here, which then gives them a different experience for those of us who did not choose to come here, but here we are. As a result of our lineage and the great kidnapping. And so given all of that, this hyper normalization to me only works for a certain subset of Americans. And so I just did not want to generalize a concept that
Mm-hmm.
probably should not be generalizable, number one. And I love that, that quote that Dr. Zelina shared, in that I think I'm grieving not a person, but a framework, a shared sense of decency, of clarity, what's right and what's way off. I think the grief for people of color and specifically for Black people is that what happens when you know that you got lemons and you've tried to make lemonade, but it's never going to be perfectly sweet. Like it may never be that because it was never intended to be that. Um, and at the same time, never being okay with it. So it goes back to some of those concepts of freedom dreaming, where can we even envision a time in which the factory settings work for everybody? I'm sorry, but when I read this article, I can't see that for everybody.
Yeah. And so there's two things, right? So the author of the Guardian article is a digital anthropologist named Rahaf Harfouche. And so I looked her
Mm-hmm.
up.
Mm-hmm.
She has very light skin.
Okay.
I don't know how she identifies racially, but her name leads me to believe that she probably doesn't identify as white, but she
Mm-hmm.
likely is not a Black American.
Mm-hmm.
And then the quote that you just read from Dr. Zelina, that was another that was an Instagram post that kind of someone had sent to me, and it followed my conversation with Shaunna about this concept. And she is a white woman psychologist, right? And so I do think the identity of the person who's authoring the piece matters, because I do
Mm-hmm.
think there is a tendency for white people, especially right now, to just feel absolutely overwhelmed, like you and I have talked about before. And I think maybe your dad said that white people just don't have the tools in their toolkit to deal with this, whereas Black people have been dealing with this for generations and so feel a bit more equipped. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but one of the things I think is interesting here is there's this one quote in the article, the Guardian article, that says, it's the visceral sense, hypernormalization is the visceral sense of waking up in an alternate timeline with a deep bodily knowing that something isn't right, but having
Mm-hmm.
no clear idea how to fix it. So, as a
Mm-hmm.
white person, that resonates with me a little bit, right? But I'm thinking about, for you, Shaunna, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what I am getting from
Mm-hmm.
you is that visceral sense of waking up in an alternate timeline. It's not really
Mm-hmm.
new to you because you have a deep bodily knowing for your entire life and generations that preceded you that something isn't right, quote unquote, right? And so this
Mm-hmm.
is like a lived experience for you that is different from me, which makes the timeline we are currently in more jarring for white people, particularly
Mm-hmm.
white liberals, maybe, right? Who had a Pollyanna-ish kind of sense of where we were headed, right? I don't know. Is that
Well, yeah, and let's add a concept that we haven't brought up in a long time on this podcast, Lisa, is the inherent savior complex that it's something that you can fix,
okay? Yeah.
right? So the assumption of I have the power to fix something. Why? Because I've been fixing stuff my whole white life. So why can't I fix this also? And I'm like,
Right. Right.
I don't know if this is fixable or not by anybody, you know? And so even the assumption that it is in your, it has been in your power to fix things up until this point. And now this jarring visceral sense that for one of the few times in your white life, you're unable to fix something is odd, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas for people of color, especially for Black people, we have, yes, tried to have this freedom dream of what would it look like if we had the ideal circumstances, in that everybody needs a part or plays a part in fixing or not even fixing, demolition and rebuilding, because it's not something that can be fixed. So maybe we need to demolish it and rebuild again. But there isn't this inherent thinking that, oh, I can fix it. Oh, I can fix it. Well, I can just step in and I can do. No, you are not the designated savior of this country, white folks. Now, you can contribute in a collaborative way to
Mm-hmm.
reframe an entire country. But if I'm talking to a white individual who has done nothing but step in with their power and privilege to fix things, and they find now that because this is a group assignment, that they can't just fix it individually, of course, they're going to have a challenging perspective of that. Of course, they will.
Do you think this hypernormalization and its kind of applicability to white people, but not anyone else, perhaps, is part of why the Democratic Party appear to be unable to come together in any cohesive, strategic way to mount a effective defense against behaviors and violations that are
Hmm.
occurring?
Hmm. Possibly. I'm gonna take y'all I'm gonna take y'all to a HBCU perspective of things that will help you get there. So historically, Black colleges and universities are well known for their bands and their, yes, sports obviously, but their marching bands, their school spirit, etc. And for some schools, one school in particular I'm thinking about right now, they talk about this notion of one band, one sound, meaning
Mm-hmm.
that if you are truly harmonized and on literally on the same musical page, you can't pick out first trumpet from second trombone from first tuba. It is literally so amalgamized that you can't pick one musician from another. And that, I think, is the problem of the Democratic Party, as well as many
Mm-hmm.
others, in that I can pick out the voice of a Cory Booker. I can pick out, like, I can pick out the voice of AOC. I can pick out all of these individualized voices, which are good. We're not saying the musicians aren't fantastic. I mean, they are,
Mm-hmm.
professional caliber folks, but at the same time, their voices ring pretty hollow if it's not one band, one sound. And we haven't had one band, one sound in God knows when this country when it comes to the
Yeah.
Democratic Party. Whereas even the wrong note can sound right when you're one band, one sound, and you're a different party. It can sound correct if you're in the right places, spaces, and on the right sheet of music. The reason why I know this is literally, y'all, I knew how to read music at 7 years old. I knew how to read music actually before that, before I could actually read the English language because my mother plays piano. And one thing that you do know is that you can have five people playing the wrong note separately and it sounds horrific. You can have five people playing the wrong note together and it can sound like perfection. So even I would say the Republican Party's got a bunch of people that are playing the wrong note, but they're playing it all together in the right timing and it sounds fantastic. Not that I agree with it,
Mm-hmm.
but it is certainly agreeable to the tone and the receivers that are hearing their message broadly across this country. Democratic Party, on the other hand, is playing a whole lot of right notes, in my personal opinion, some wrong, but a lot of right notes, but they have yet to harmonize anything, and that's why we are where we are. A lot of
Yeah,
good
that's
people not on the
yeah.
same page, and it just sucks because again, here goes the freedom dreaming that I was talking about before. You know that this can be a beautiful masterpiece if everybody got on the same page. You have the hope that it will, but it never seems to do so. At what point do I, as a person of color who knows I'm not hearing the right thing, decide to say, look, this is the universal, I'm washing my hands of the matter because it is taking way too much energy from me compared to someone else who is exponentially empowered and, in fact, voted into office to do this very work. So I'm going to do this.
Yeah, I think this is probably beyond the scope of this conversation. I do think that the Democratic Party has historically and continues to be a bigger tent than the Republican Party. And so there's just a much greater
That's right.
variability and diversity of opinions, voices, perspectives, ideals. And that just makes that harmonization harder, I think.
Absolutely.
They're also less authoritarian in their perspective, right? I mean, the Republican Party is a small c conservative, which means to conserve tradition, order, structure, right? And the Democratic Party is not that. So I think that it
No.
doesn't really lend itself to that. But
Yeah.
with that, I think we will include the link to this Guardian article about hypernormalization in the show notes so you can read it and think about it for yourself and whether it applies or doesn't apply. And based on that answer, why you think that is for your own self-reflection. So hopefully we have created some opportunity here for you to think a little deeper about the surreal anxiety or washing your hands of things feeling that you are having in this moment. All right, so let's jump into phase two. Okay, so this isn't funny. I don't know why I'm laughing, but I feel like coming off of the conversation around
Yeah.
hypernormalization, right? And we think
Yeah.
about what's normal in our culture, and we are in graduation season. And so whether it's
Yes.
graduation from high school, graduation from college, or I just drove past like a little tiny people school and they were having
Uh-huh.
their little graduation in these little like I don't know, 6-year-olds or 7-year-olds or whatever in their little blue graduation gowns.
Oh, that must have been it's a particular school that my boys went to that also had blue caps and gowns, and they're like 5-year-olds going to kindergarten. It was the cutest thing ever.
Yes,
Yeah.
so it was very cute. Not never. I've only ever graduated from a college because graduation before then is not a thing in the United Kingdom. But
Hmm.
so as we are thinking about normal things that are happening in our culture, graduation. However, some of you might be aware that there have been some things amiss in graduation ceremonies where we are seeing this disturbing trend of students being banned from their graduations or having their diplomas revoked or halted or some impediment being placed on their ability to engage in their graduation celebration. And so we've got a few examples that we wanted to talk through. So the first one is a young person who identifies as gay. She's a student at a Christian high school and posted something online that about her girlfriend, I believe, and there was then called into the office and penalized for doing so. And one of the penalties she faced was that she was prohibited from attending her high school graduation. I forget which state that was in. And then we have a New York University student who gave the graduation speech, but because the content of their speech included a plea to end the war in Gaza, to end the suffering there, they were told they did not abide by the parameters of the speech. And actually, they've been accused of lying. I'm not sure what went down, but the university is saying that the student said that they understood and that they wouldn't talk about Israel and Palestine, and then they did. So they have retracted that person's diploma or at least withheld it. And then Virginia Commonwealth University and George Washington, same issue. Graduation speeches have included pleas to end what some people are naming genocide or ethnic cleansing, and they have been penalized with the withholding of their diploma or being dragged off stage. I've seen a number of videos where people have been holding up the Palestinian flag and have been accosted by security and dragged out of their graduations. And then, Shaunna, you sent me a little video, a news piece related to a student at the University of Buffalo, I believe it was, who brought their young child, very young, like not old enough to walk. Like, so he was carrying his son across the stage to get his diploma and was chased onto the stage by security because carrying your child to collect your diploma is apparently against the University of Buffalo's policy, which is just ridiculous. And so the security was trying to enforce this policy. I'm not sure why they thought it was a good idea to chase this person while holding their child onto the stage to get his diploma. And the president of Buffalo did make light of it, wasn't an asshole about it, made a little joke about the son not being old enough, not having accrued enough credits to get the diploma, and hopes to see that kiddo back at the University of Boulder in 16 years or something to start their degree. So I'm wondering what you're thinking about all this, because it does speak to a little bit about that disjuncture that's happening where people are trying to do normal things, but these normal things are being disrupted in ways that people are not used to, right? Whether or not you agree with the type of disruption, the fact that things are not proceeding as they normally would, I suppose, and that these penalties that are occurring, which is, bans or diploma removals, just tells us we're in a little bit of a different time here. So, Shaunna, what are your thoughts on some of these news pieces that have been kind of trickling out over the last month about these students?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I brought up the University at Buffalo student that was holding his baby son, just to give you all even more of the broad swath of reasons why there's been these many disruptions based on identity group across the country here. But to your point, you're you're striking at some of my heartstrings on some of these, Lisa, because everyone knows I'm a native Virginian. So VCU, I've mentored students at VCU. I've attended programs at VCU. It's a deep, rich part of the Richmond community, of course. And I'm also an alum of GW and taught there in the Columbian College. And so, all of that is quite fascinating to me, given that VCU, like I mentioned, is situated in Richmond, which is, we know, that's the seat of all types of history when it comes to the Civil War. But at the same time, it is also the seat of government for the state. And so it's not uncommon for you just to randomly see a governor walking down the street in Richmond because that's just the culture of the area. And then GW, of course, is positioned right here in Washington, D.C. And so, Lisa, you and I know we probably can't remember a time in which we weren't working for some college or university that at least said that they were striving to develop global citizens, right? They're striving to develop students
Yep.
that are
Yep.
self-aware. They're striving to create students that are leaders and vocal about the world and their experiences in it. And so to me, sorry, y'all, I think it's extremely hypocritical that as we look at this trend of students speaking out in their graduations, I'm even thinking about some high school graduations where students valedictorian, salutatorian wrote their graduation speech and went on a little bit of a justified rant on certain things that they felt
Mm-hmm.
strongly about. I applaud those very students because isn't that a result of wonderful education? That they are leaders, that they are
Mm-hmm.
not afraid, that they are courageous, that they see what's going on in the world. Whether you agree with it or not, they are aware and they feel as if this is a platform of opportunity to create change for someone. And so the fact that we claim that we want to produce these global citizens and then when they actually are, we
Yeah.
have a problem with it, to me feels hypocritical, Lisa. And so whether I agree with their perspective or not, we wanted to develop this. And so, with that, like, for example, I'll give you another example here, Lisa, which is closer to home. Everyone knows on this podcast, I worked at University of Maryland for 10 years before going off to Towson University. And this year they had what was called the commencement because Kermit the Frog was the commencement speaker, right? Now, for those of us who grew up with, all of Jim Henson's puppeteering, it made sense because Jim Henson is an alum of the University of Maryland. It just made sense in so many different ways. Now, Lisa, let me tell you something. Don't you know? Folks even wanted to protest that shit. Okay? They even wanted to
Really?
protest. Yes. They wanted to protest Kermit the Frog speaking at a damn commencement. And so again, I wanted to bring the commencement up as an example of there were folks that spoke up against that selection for a commencement speaker. And as much as I vehemently disagree with their perspective on Kermit the Frog, I mean, this is, especially in the United States, this is just a beloved figure of adults, children alike. Um, but I still applaud their courage to be able to speak up that they disagree and these are the reasons why they disagree and they also presented other options for who they thought would be a better fit for speak. Did we not produce
Right.
those type of aware students that had no problem giving voice to their concerns? That's still a win in my perspective, even though I firmly disagree with y'all beating
Yeah.
up on Kermit the Frog. No, but um, I think that these unfortunate trends of banning or withholding diplomas and so forth, I do think that that is extremely problematic, given that we are seeing the fruits of our labor as higher ed administrators, faculty, and staff. This is what we wanted, right? So I thought.
Yeah. And, these folks have put in all the work. And then you're taking something away from them at the very last minute because their speech, it is protected.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so interestingly, Scott Pelley, who's a 60 Minutes host, gave the commencement speech at Wake Forest, and he I mean, I thought it was great. It was a rousing speech about the attacks on the media and that
Mm,
what's happening is not okay, it's not right, and it's a slippery slope.
mm-hmm,
It's a really good commencement speech. And so I don't know whether Wake Forest knew the content of his speech, right? But he has power and privilege. What are they going to do? Take his speech away from him? You know, but
mm-hmm,
so he's in a position where he was able to give this what some might
mm-hmm,
consider provocative, others might call unpatriotic speech.
mm-hmm,
But students are in a much more vulnerable position, right? And so the power of not yet having your diploma in hand
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
um, feels really troubling to me that the university system is holding that over the heads of students who, to your point, have been educated to articulate an opinion, back up their opinion with evidence, provide cogent arguments, do what they believe in, have passion for what they do, and yet this is being penalized. I mean, in the case of the student at the high school who self-identified as gay online, you know, that's not even something she can change, right? And you are prohibiting, like, someone who wanted to give a speech about some political something happening somewhere, they could just not give the speech, right? But you can't stop being a dad and you can't stop being gay, and yet you are being penalized for those
mm-hmm,
kind of immutable identities. um
mm-hmm,
I don't know,
mm-hmm,
it feels really troubling because I just feel like this is a new era
mm-hmm.
that
Yeah.
we have not, or at least modern era that we have not experienced, at least you and I in our lifetime, the same to the
Mm-hmm.
same degree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and so I'm going to take us on a little bit of a rabbit trail and bring us right back real quick.
Excellent. Do it.
The rabbit trail is, and I post this every year when it comes to commencement time on my social media, is that this is the season where, especially Black people, but people of color, immigrants, so forth, this is the graduation season when no, we will not be quiet until the end of the commencement activities because we know that there are certain folks in this room that are walking across the stage right now that the systems did not want to see that happen. I
Yeah.
particularly named this on my social media accounts where I said particularly that Black folks will not be quiet during commencement because certain white folks in this country didn't even want us to be able to read. And so, of
Yeah.
course, we are going to act a fool. We're going to have the bobbleheads and the foam fingers. And no, we are not going to be quiet because the rejoicing nature of what's happening right now goes beyond just the 4 or 5 years that this kid was in school or this person was in school. This goes back generations historically and moving forward. And so, given that, the way we celebrate, the way we penalize, the way we structure commencements, I
Mm-hmm.
hope someone much smarter than myself has started. Here we go, disrupting. I hope someone has started to query what the heck is the purpose of a commencement then? What's the purpose of it? Is it
Right.
the purpose of a little known politician slash alum that just wants this bullet on their CV or resume saying that they were the commencement speaker at XYZ University? Is that what this is about?
Mm-hmm.
Or is this celebrating the, how can I say, celebrating the evolution, the metamorphosis of these students into what we said we wanted, which were global citizens, regardless of how that shows up? I think
Right.
we're missing the purposes of that. I think, for example, when they announce, everyone be quiet. I know it's long. I know you got 1,000 grad. I get all of that, but I'm sorry. Your expediency for the timeline of the agenda does not trump 400 years of foolishness for Black people. So we're going to celebrate, right? What's the purpose of the celebratory event? That's the reason why, which we know it's starting to get banned right now, because There's a particular purpose for current commencement activities for the general ones, whether it's the university-wide one or the specific college or department ones. They comport themselves in one way. But guess what? Now you're starting to defund and cancel the lavender graduations, the Black student graduations, all the other particular graduations that allow people to celebrate this
Right.
metamorphosis of the student. So where the hell are we supposed to go?
Right.
What's the purpose of commencement? And if we don't kind of redefine and think about whether it's outdated or irrelevant because of the change in context, what have you, I think we're behind the ball in regards to having this conversation of what is commencement for? What is it for? And if it's not for the students and their metamorphosis, then I think we're doing it wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that this does present an opportunity, whether people will take the opportunity to rethink. Like, you're giving a handful of students an opportunity to address their peers, right? And I'm not sure the process by which these students get chosen. Sometimes it's because you're top in your class, right? Other times it's because there's a vote. So let them express themselves. I mean, I think obviously the line is hate speech, and I understand that can feel different, particularly with Israel and Palestine for different people. And yet, if you're going to allow students to speak, right, or express their energy and celebratory perspectives, whether that's your child or that you're talking about your girlfriend or whatever, like, I don't know, it just makes me sad. So I am not optimistic, Shaunna, that people will take you up on your invitation to rethink.
I don't think so, but Lisa, what I will do to what I'll do to lift your spirits, I know that Virginia State and a couple of other HBCUs had the most incredible commencements. There was so much joy and happiness and dancing and all the things that will certainly lift your spirits. So I will send you some links of HBCU graduations, and you will see the purposes of those commencements and how people were in the best spirits, because people did get to protest. People did get to wear their pride regalia. They got to do all those things.
All the things.
Without, get to carry their kid across the stage. They got to do all of I mean, fraternities and sororities got to represent with their, everything that we do as Greeks in their form of celebration. Lisa, I think what you've brought up for all of us is to think about, why are we limiting our students to only celebrate in one way?
Yeah.
So I'll send you some fun stuff so that you can laugh and cry at, because it's so good. So, but yeah, it's problematic. This might be my unexcavated reason for disliking commencement so much, is that I'm sorry, y'all, I don't want to hear the boring white guy talk about his career and what you should do. I just don't.
Yeah. Well, it's like you have to color within the lines, right? And if you color outside of the lines, unless you're a Scott Pelley from 60 Minutes from CBS, right, you are going to get penalized for that. And that is fundamentally, I think, a violation of freedom of speech rights. And to your earlier point around everything that students get taught in high school and in college about what it means to fight for a cause that you believe in or celebrate with the people you want to celebrate with. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Well, leave it to Lisa and I to get y'all all riled up as we wrap up this podcast here, but that was a really good one. If you have been impressed by what we've discussed during these first two phases in our Word of the Week, please share this podcast. You can reach us on all of the social media and podcast apps. So whichever is your favorite, you'll find us there at Unfazed Unedited. You can email us at info@unfazedpodcast.com, or just visit our website for all things pod at unfazedpodcast.com. You can access both the old and the newest shows. So like, subscribe, leave a review for us, share with your friends, coworkers, and others in this phase of your life. So, Dr. Lisa, until next time.
Until next time, see you folks.